Welcome to Comparative Politics, and I hope you enjoyed our introductory videos. And what I want to begin to do here is talk a little bit about comparative politics, and in this set of lectures, I want to talk about the methodology of comparative politics. Because if you don't understand what we're trying to do as comparativists, then you might have a really hard time understanding the whole kind of discipline, because there's a big conversation about methodology. But to do that, we need to talk a little bit about a broad topic, which is what is politics? This is a great big question, and probably all of you who are taking this class have been interested in the question of what is politics? Or at least I'm kind of hoping you might be. And this is a broad one, because what is it, right? And I think our gut reaction is to respond that politics is things that happens in government, right? It's Obama, it's George Bush, it's Rick Scott, it's some current politician, it's something like this. But really we need to get beyond that, because politics is a broader topic than this. I bet you at some point at work, I bet you at some point the guy who's an idiot got the promotion, and you're all sitting around the cooler and you're talking about this, and the inevitable conclusion is what? Well, that's just political. He got the job because of politics. Well, what do we mean by that? And I think this is actually maybe a more honest use of the word politics. What we mean by that is that politics, in a broad sense, is who gets what, when, and how. And as a matter of fact, a famous political scientist named Harold Laswell is going to be the first person to really push this forward. He's going to sum it up really well. He's going to say politics is who gets what, when, and how. We want to understand why people are getting what they're getting in the situations that they are. Now you'll notice that this means that politics is a much bigger, broader definition than probably what you're used to. Because what you're used to thinking about is just government. But politics happens in your family. Politics happens in a classroom. So for instance, I know this is an online class, but imagine the last time you went to your first class at Daytona State or in high school, wherever you were last. You come in and you sit normally in neat, orderly rows. And while you're sitting there, you're typically going to have deference. You're going to wait for the professor. The professor's going to show up. They're going to come in. They're going to hand out a syllabus with all these rules about how they're going to grade you and all this kind of stuff for the class. And you're going to listen about this, and you're going to show a lot of deference to this person. Why? Well, there's probably one of two big reasons. Either you want knowledge, and you recognize the professor can give that to you, and only the professor can give that to you. Or you want a grade, and you recognize that institutionally it is the professor who's going to have to give that to you. In either case, we have a political reaction taking place because we have a power relationship. And so politics is about studying power. It's about understanding the power relationship and saying, okay, the reason why in the classroom I'm showing deference to the professor is because he or she has something that I need and or want. And that's the big key here. So politics is about studying power relationships among potential actors. And this can lead to understanding a number of conundrums. So let's assume that somebody is in my class and they've gotten the syllabus and they did all these things. If someone were to watch this, they might be a little bit confused and ask, well, why are they showing deference to Dr. Orndorff? Maybe they might even think, oh, it's because they're in love with me. Because they probably don't do these things for someone they love, right? So imagine, do you have a wife or a husband? Do you wait for them to speak first? Do you allow them to grade on a variety of, very personal metrics, personal things about you? My guess is that probably not. But if we understand politics, if we understand power relationships, then we can explain why you're doing that for me, even though you're not doing that for your loved one. But of course, this leads us to a second and really important question, and that is, what is power? So now that we understand that politics is about this distribution of power, we have to understand something more about power. So what does it mean to have power or power over someone? Well, having power over someone is going to mean that you can get them to do things, right? So for instance, I have a son. He's a really cute little guy. And it was not that long ago that he enjoyed eating cardboard boxes, right? That's what he loved to do, and so I had to go to all kinds of measures to try to stop him from doing this. I thought it was funny. But nevertheless, it's probably not a good idea to eat cardboard. So if I would have gone home one day and said, TJ is my son's name, TJ, go eat the cardboard. Would I have had power over him? Well, probably not, because that's what TJ would have done in a natural state. The question is could I potentially stop him from eating the keyboard? And if I can stop him from eating the cardboard, then maybe I've had power over him. And so what we mean by this is that power is the ability to force someone to do something they were not already inclined to do. So if I can get someone to do something that they don't prefer, now we're talking about having a power relationship. So if I can force you to do the reading for this class, even though you don't want to, that's a power relationship. If I can get you to listen to this lecture, this set of slides, that's a power relationship. But now we don't want to look at power relationships just any way. We want to look at power relationships a very specific way. We want to look at them scientifically, because after all, this is a political science class. And so this means we have yet another question that we have to pose, and that is, what is science? Now, science means that we're trying to study something a certain way. And it's really easy, especially with politics, to be primarily interested in kind of the wonk side of politics, right? It'd be a Politico. Well, we know this had this effect because we've been watching the news a lot. Well, that's not to say that that can't happen. But that's not a very scientific way to try to understand the way people are behaving in a variety of ways. And so in this class, we're going to try to ask, what is happening politically across a variety of countries scientifically? Now, for our purposes, we're going to define science as the systematic study of a subject through both or either rational thought and empirical observation. So science is trying to understand what is and what can be. So we want to understand what is. But there's some important elements of science, this process, this rationality to it. And that's going to kind of define what it is. And there's going to be then one really big thing, especially for our class, that we're going to see that it cannot do. Now, the thing that is really important here, or the key elements, is that science is always falsifiable. That means that the claims can be demonstrated to be inaccurate. So if you're making a claim and it cannot be demonstrated inaccurate, then we're no longer talking about science. We could be talking about something else that we'll discuss in this class, and that's ideology. But it's definitely not science. So examples of things that are not scientific: it is wrong to kill. That is a moral observation, and we'll talk about that more. The second thing is that science is attempting to explain and predict, or maybe even better to say, we're attempting to explain so that we can predict. So we want to understand the mechanisms of the world around us, so we use hypotheses and all these kinds of claims, and then we verify those expectations by looking at how these mechanisms predict the future. So if I think I've accurately understood how presidents win an election, then not only should I be able to explain why someone has won an election currently or in the past, I should be able to predict in the future how someone will win. And notice, if I can predict, this is obviously a claim that can be demonstrated to be false, and therefore would definitely be science. Now, there is one thing, especially for our purposes, that is definitely not science, and those are normative claims. Normative claims are things that we ought to do. So they're ethical claims. It means that a normative claim is saying you should or should not engage in some behavior or some activity. Science cannot, underscore that, science cannot produce normative claims. It can only tell us about how the world is and how it could arrange itself in the future. It cannot tell us how it ought to arrange itself or how we as people ought to arrange ourselves. And this can be frustrating at first, because one of the things we want to do as people is know, okay, this is what I believe should happen. And that's fine. And we're going to talk about those kinds of shoulds a little bit later in this class. It's just that we can't analyze those shoulds scientifically. So assume with me for a minute, this is some made-up data. I'm just creating this to give you kind of an idea. So imagine I run a study. So assume I run a study, and we see, on the basis of this study, that as taxes in a country increases, that there is a corresponding increase in the percentage poverty rate of that country. So obviously in our example here, when taxes are nearly zero for most citizens, the poverty rate also hovers around zero. But we start bringing this up for citizens, and slowly the poverty rate continues to increase until we're nearly universal poverty. What should we do on the basis of this data? Well, you might be tempted to say, well, on the basis of this data, we should lower government spending, right? Maybe, but maybe not. The answer is it depends on your normative background. So if you assume that poverty is a bad thing, meaning normatively something we want to avoid, then indeed this study would demonstrate that we should lower taxes. But science can't tell us that poverty is a bad thing. Perhaps, in fact, poverty is a good thing. So assume for a moment that poverty is something we should want. Maybe, for instance, we're going to take the words of Jesus pretty literally in the New Testament when he says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And so I'm a country and I decide, look, I want all of my citizens to go to heaven. How am I going to ensure this? Well, I know how I'll ensure this. I will make them all poor. And in this case, poverty would be a normatively good thing. And my study would then show that we should increase taxes. So notice the study didn't show what we should do. It only shows us what will happen on the basis of increasing or decreasing taxes. So the empirical statement, no matter how true, can never tell us what we ought to do. But in political science, we're going to be interested with both ises and oughts. And the readings that you guys are going to do in this class are going to deal with both ises and oughts. That means we want to understand the scientific side of things, the question of how things are, but we also want to look at things about how ought they be. So how ought government be arranged? The implications of this are important. And the authors we're going to look at are going to come from a variety of ways. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't take a look at ought questions. It just means that to do that, we have to use a separate set of reasoning. We need to use some kind of abstract philosophical reasoning, not scientific reasoning. So when you're dealing with an author, we need to be able to untangle the is questions from the ought questions. Now, inside of the is questions, the empirical side, there are two big ways we can look at political science, qualitatively and quantitatively. And we're going to do a little bit of a research project on this. So take a look under content, because I'm going to have you do a little bit on a discussion board concerning qualitative and quantitative data.